Hi, this is Greg Koopman, SSIS 2016, Session 2, Part 4. In this video, I'm going to discuss continuing data flow activity after errors. These topics will include the event handler code for the data flow OnError event, setting Propagate system variable, preparing message variable for untrapped error, and routing trapped and untrapped errors. Once it hits, let's say there's 2,000 rows and they all have errors. Well, if we go back to our control flow, remember if you have an error, it's going to go up to the error handler and it's going to send out an email. All right, now if it goes up there, either it's going to send out one email and stop the whole package, which we don't want because we want to be able to see all the errors if there's other errors. Or it's going to send out, it's going to go through all 2,000 rows and send out 2,000 emails, which no one's going to like. No. Okay, so that's why we have to block it. Okay, we don't want this to cascade and bubble up to the event handler higher. So we go to its event handler for that data flow. So I'm going to go to that data flow, which is called 3010 load micros item master. So I go to its event handlers, and again, I'm not on it here. You got to see where you're at. This is the package level. So I'm going to go down to the full base table loads, and here it is, load micros item master. So once I highlight that, I say okay, I'll see its event handler. So I've set up an event handler for this so when an error happens, it will go here. So what this is going to do is set up a system variable that blocks it from going up to the top and blowing up the package right away. It's going to block it so it can keep on doing its thing, and it's going to trap the error and push it into that error table for me. Okay, that way we don't have to stop the whole package, and if there's 50 tables we're loading and we get to the third table and it has an error in it, well, we start rerunning it again, then the 8th table has a error in it, and then we want to run them all the way through where we get at the very end all our error. If there's any errors, we get them all at one time. We can go correct them all, rerun it, or whatever we want to do then. Okay, we don't want to have to be forced to stop and start, stop and start, stop, start. Okay, as much as we possibly can, we avoid it.
But you are logging, if you're looping through 2,000 records.
We're logging to that error table.
So you're going to log all 2,000 into that table?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So, and that's what you'll see here. It's basically, if we look back at that data flow, this is a data flow here. But this one also is a data flow because that data is still flowing through these things. Mm-hmm. It does a little conversion here in the meantime, which I'll get to. But when it gets down here, I have an error table just waiting for it here. And it's all mapped up here. Okay, these are all mapped. All right?
So how did you associate, like this is when you hit that error, we went to event handler. How is that association made? It's made
like
you're not hitting the event handler.
There's no call to the event handler.
There's no way to see it there.
The event handler is... It's based on events. So if you have an error event in that object, it will go to that error handler for that event.
Did you define that in the container?
Then I define that. I come into the event handler. I go to the proper place and I code it here. But the bubble up to the event handler happens as the event occurs on that object. Okay. So an event in this case can be any of these things. So I'm over in 310. So I could do it on error, which is really the only time I really want to block it is if an error happens. There's no error, I don't need it. I can do on information. That's if any information is sent. I could log that. On progress. There's lots of these things that you probably will never use. On warning, on a failure, on progress, on validation. There's a lot of these things you don't have to use. Now I use on pre-validate up at the package level because I wanted to log every time it went into a new object. So, but here I'm just doing the on error. So how do we get it to block? As soon as it goes in and gets an error, it jumps over to this event first. It jumps to the event that responds to that object first. If there's nothing in it, it bubbles up to the container. If there's nothing in the container, it bubbles up to the package. Okay? But since there is something in here, it has this. There's your script task, right? So here's your variables. So you go in here and you have a variable, and you can come in here and you say, I'm going to send these variables into a script. And here's your script is in this button. When you press that button, I'll open up a .NET editor for C#, okay? And as you see, this is set to C# up here. You can also set that to VB.NET. But okay, so here I have a variable. So I go to my variables. I'm going to say I'm going to read write. I want to write to this propagate, and the propagate is you could call that bubble up or cascade up. And propagate, if it's set to true, that means by default it's true and it's going to bubble up. But if you set it to false, it won't bubble up. So it won't bubble up to the event handler that's higher above it, which is the package, which would fail the package. Okay, which is what we're trying to do. So when I go to propagate and I click on, if I want to see what variables I can use, I click here. I can type it in, but basically you come here and you just click on I have my variables, my regular variables, and I have at the event handler level for OnError, I only have these system variables. They're in context here. So right now I can tell what error happened. I can tell what error code happened, right? But what I'm going to do is set propagate to false. So I'm setting the propagate. I'm not setting it here, but I'm telling it that I need propagate to be. I'm going to write to propagate. If I was only going to do read only, I don't need to. I don't need to set it to read write. So I go to edit. Now I'm going one more layer underneath. Okay, so I'm not like 4 layers down or 5 layers. I'm from the main control screen into the data flow level. From the data flow level into its event handler, from its event handler into an object in the event handler, from the object in the event handler into its configuration, and now from its configuration all the way down to some .NET code. Okay, so you got to remember there's layers to this thing, and you got to be aware of them and where you're at in them. Otherwise, you get lost and it's difficult. So now I'm editing, and it pulls up an entire editor, a nice editor for Visual Studio. So here, in this area here, in the main area, all I do is I set this DTS object variables to system propagate. And if you see how I do this, for example, if I said DTS here, there's all the IntelliSense you need, right? And then you type variables, right? And so you can do it. It's just like a regular editor. So what this does is this sets the propagate variable, system variable, to false, so it doesn't bubble up. Okay? Now, so there's the code that we're trying to run, and that turns it off. That turns off the bubbling off. So let's say okay, and we're back there. Next, I come in here and I take my system error message. If it's some other kind of error, there's several kinds of errors that can happen in this data flow. Some of them I can trap and some of them I can't trap. Sometimes you can't trap the error. So again, you don't want it to bubble up and do 2,000 messages out. And so I want to get the error message. And so here I grab the system message in case this error is so bad that I'm not going to be able to even trap it inside my error tables. So what I do is I stuff this error message into a special error message called system error message for that particular area. And you'll see this a little later. And again, all this does is that I come in here and I edit it, and I basically assign the system error message at that point in time to this variable, which I can use later. Because later, if I'm down 3 steps, if I'm 3 steps objects away, it's out of context. I won't be able to get that error message. So I grab that error message here, and I just save it in case the error is so bad I can still get it out in my email message and tell you what happened. Okay, so that's what I do in this second step. So now I'm going back to control, I'm going to go back to the data flow. And so that's what happens in there, okay? So as that rolls through, go back to the control flow. After it's finished, what happens then? If something really bad happens in it, and it really forces an error here, which it shouldn't, but if it's like you change a column name in the middle while it's running, that could do it where it's like a hard failure. It will cause a failure, and then it will go down this route. If there's no failure, which means it could still have errors, but if they were trapped in here, which didn't cause a hard failure. So as far as this is concerned, it succeeded, yet it logged the errors to an error table. Then what I'll do here is I go and I check that error table and see if there's any data, if there's more than 0 rows in there. If there's more than 0 rows, that means there's an error that happened. So I come in here, I run some code that does a count, and I stuff it inside of a variable called error count. That means there's errors that hit the error table. Most of the time there won't be any errors hitting anything. Okay, but if there are, then it's trapped. It's put in here, and then after that occurs, here I say, once it checks for the error count, if it's 0, I don't want to go and email any errors. But if it's not 0, I come into here and I say expression and constraint. If the count is greater than 0, then that says keep on going.
Thank you for watching.